The first bill is House File 1767. Representative Koran, welcome to your own committee. Please introduce the bill, move the bill, introduce it, and proceed.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chair and committee members. First, I'll say we will have a DE amendment for this bill, and I'll just briefly, I'll say that initially House File 1767 was written to codify ICS services. And since we've had this conversation about how to increase program integrity and where we're finding weaknesses that allow people to commit fraud within our human services systems, we've taken to heart, taken it seriously that rather than codifying a program that's so vulnerable to fraud, that perhaps we should take a different direction. And so with that, I would like to offer the DE4.
We have DE4. Representative Koran moves adoption of DE4. Any discussions? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The DE4 is now adopted. To your bill as amended.
Thank you again so much, Chair and committee members. So now with the DE4, the different direction that we've gone in is to recognize that there are some.
Representative Koran, I think the initial motion was to move the bill. I think we stated it, but I'm going to repeat it again.
Oh, okay, sure.
So the first, Representative Koran moves the House File 1767, and that was the initial motion, and then the secondary motion was to adopt the DE bill.
So we should adopt the DE again.
Do we need to adopt again? Because we already moved it at the beginning. So I'll check in with nonpartisan staff just in case to make sure that everything is aligned. Ms. Punier.
Mr. Chair, I think everything is okay.
All right, proceed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chair. So the DE4 represents our efforts to recognize that the ICS program is vulnerable to fraud. It's been labeled as one of the 14 high-risk programs by DHS. And so rather than leave it vulnerable as it is, leaving it vulnerable to fraud, also though leaving it vulnerable where good providers who are providing much needed and necessary services are getting tangled up in prepayment or payment withholds, prepayment review. And we've seen that that action can have dire consequences on people receiving services. And so what this bill now does is establishes a legislative group. Essentially, that would be like a special committee, but just smaller. Thank you, Representative Keeler, for this fantastic idea. We would take basically a smaller human services committee that is still open with all stakeholders invited, and we would just get to work focused solely on what ICS could and should look like so that it's not vulnerable to fraud, and it's meeting the needs of people in our communities, and that it's workable for the people who are supporting our neighbors. So it establishes that legislative group. It does have an aggressive timeline because I'd love it if we could have done some of this work sooner, and that's why you're seeing we're serious about making this change quickly. Part of the bill also entails that during this period, the Department of Human Services should pause any changes. It'll allow the work group to create that transition plan, to create a vision of what those programs can look like that are solid and not vulnerable to fraud, where people can still get the services they need. And in order to be able to do that effectively, we need to be able to work with a pause in all the changes that have happened. But we're only asking for about 6 months or so for DHS to kind of pause. The bill also does state, though, that during this time when we're reconfiguring ICS supports together, that DHS, by all means, can and should continue to investigate fraud and hold people accountable. So it does nothing to stop those efforts. And finally, Section 3 of the bill, it terminates ICS as we know it today. And I know that can sound scary when we're talking about terminating a program. However, it was pretty scary when the Department of Human Services terminated a program without this extensive group work together. And so this is a collective effort between legislators and community members to recognize that we have a problem and sort of put a sunset on our own terms and recognize that the way things are going now aren't quite working out, and we're all ready to find a solution that works better, and we're ready to say that the way it's working now isn't feasible in the long term. So that's the meat of the bill, and I'll turn it over to our testifier.
Mr. Berg, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, and thank you for the opportunity to testify in full support of this bill. I want to begin by acknowledging something that is both obvious and uncomfortable. Ending or even seriously contemplating ending a service that took years to design and roll out and that has only been operating statewide for just over 5 years should give us all pause. It should feel heavy, it should make us uneasy, and it should force us to slow down and ask hard questions. At the same time, it would be dishonest to sit here and pretend that integrated community supports, as currently implemented, is working the way anyone intended. It isn't. People receiving services feel the instability, providers trying to do everything right feel it every day, and the system itself has shown real strain. As we have this conversation, it's also important to ground it in facts, especially about what ICS actually is and how we got here. ICS was not an accidental service or a workaround. It was explicitly created as a new service in Minnesota's home and community-based statewide transition plan that was approved by CMS in 2019. DHS described ICS as the replacement for customized living for individuals ages 18 to 54 on CADI and BI waivers. The system was directed intentionally towards this model. And when we talk about ICS growth, we need to be precise. The growth of ICS is often described as exponential and lumped in with other high-risk services that have been called out over the past several months. But DHS's own waiver plan amendments tell a different story. DHS acknowledged that ICS growth was slower than anticipated. And importantly, much of the so-called growth was not new people entering services. It was shifting individuals from customized living and supportive living settings into the ICS service DHS itself created. The context matters because mischaracterizing growth leads to policy overcorrections, and those overcorrections land hardest on the people receiving services and providers acting in good faith. Which brings me to a critical point. Nothing in this bill limits DHS's authority to address fraud, enhance program integrity, or remove bad actors from the system. In fact, this bill explicitly preserves DHS's ability to do enforcement, investigations, and sanctions. So let me be very clear. This is not a bill that weakens oversight. It is a bill that insists on smarter oversight. Right now, DHS is attempting to fix structural problems mid-flight through rapid changes, shifting standards, and proposals that fundamentally alter the service without a replacement ready. That approach risks destabilizing everyone, including the good providers, while still failing to resolve the underlying integrity issues. This bill does something far more responsible. It creates the space to intentionally rebuild so that the program integrity is not retrofitted onto a fragile system, but embedded directly into the system on the next service. Better rate structures, clearer documentation standards, stronger guardrails around high-cost plans, defined licensing expectations, and consistent enforcement tools that are clear from day one. That is how you create a system that is tighter, stronger, and more enforceable from the start, rather than constantly chasing the problems after the fact. Right now, the people with the most at stake are individuals who rely on integrated community supports for continuity, daily relation-based supports that help them stay housed, stable, and connected to their communities. Right alongside them are providers who built programs, hired staff, and invested in good faith based on the direction DHS gave us. These are not bad actors. These are not providers gaming the system. They are organizations trying to follow the rules in a system where rules kept moving. Over the past 5 years, expectations around rates, documentation, service structure, licensing, and compliance have shifted repeatedly, often without clear codification or realistic timelines. Providers adapt, they reinvest, they recalibrate, and then the rules change again. That is not accountability, that is churn. And churn is devastating to continuity of care. Now we are facing proposals like converting a daily relationship-based service into a unit-based model. Without data, without evidence it will improve outcomes, and without a clear explanation of how it will avoid fragmenting care. For people receiving services, these are not abstract policy decisions. They mean staff turnover, disrupted routines, gaps in care, and for some individuals, the real risk of losing housing altogether. That is why this bill matters. The language before you creates a deliberate pause, one that preserves enforcement authority while preventing irreversible structural decisions until a replacement is ready. It forces DHS, legislators, providers, counties, advocates, and people with lived experience to confront the hard questions that have gone unanswered for years. What does sustainability actually look like? What does real program integrity look like when built correctly? And how do we protect continuity of care while holding the system accountable? Without this bill, the most likely outcome is not a better system. It's provider exits, frozen capacity, and people losing supports long before a new service exists. This bill slows the dangerous part without stopping progress. It protects people now, and it sets us up to rebuild a system that is stronger, clearer, and more enforceable from day one. Mr. Chair and members, this is not about defending a flawed service. It is about protecting people while we build something better and build it the right way. I encourage you to support this bill and help see this across the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Do we have anyone? Oh, no, we don't have the second person. Zania Harut, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me. Yes. Yes, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify. My name is Zania Harut, and I'm the board chair of the Residential Providers Association of Minnesota, and I'm also an ICS provider. I want to thank Representative Curran and Chair Noor for their continued work on this issue and their commitment to getting ICS right for the people who depend on it. We've spent the past several months across multiple stakeholder meetings documenting the structural problems in this program and bringing forward solutions. We appreciate DHS's willingness to meet with us throughout the process, and we look forward to continuing work with the department and stakeholders on policy clarifications in the meantime. We support this amendment as the right alternative to the governor's proposal to convert ICS to unit-based billing and the other proposals to ICS. We've had productive conversations with the department about that, and what we heard from the community, as well as that the unit-based model raises serious operational questions, particularly for settings where staffing reflects availability and presence rather than discrete tasks. Our view is that how this program is set up right now, it cannot be resolved responsibly, and that the current problems in ICS are based in the fact that there are two separate models operating. There is a site-based model in which staff are stationed in buildings with multiple individuals, and in ICS, there's also a scattered site model in which individuals are living in scattered site apartments and the staff are coming to them for on-call support or for scheduled meetings. And both of those types of services are currently operating under the same rate framework as if they were identical. And that mismatch is creating a serious compliance risk across the entire system. Because ICS has never been fully codified in statute, there is no answer to resolve these issues with billing and compliance. Enforcement defaults to whatever interpretation in policy, as Josh mentioned, the policy keeps changing, to which interpretation is the most restrictive at the time, regardless of what the providers were actually following in DHS's language online or in the FAQs. Beyond billing and documentation issues, ICS providers have documented several structural gaps that must be addressed with this group. There is no shared staffing recognition currently in statute, leaving site-based providers with staffing on site with no legal basis for the staffing model in which they operate. There's no standardized setting approval process currently. There's no coverage for nursing and transportation, and most site-based programs are actually just covering this. And there's currently no reliable public data on how many settings are actually operating and how many units are occupied in those settings. And I want to close with that. All ICS providers are currently uncomfortable with the status quo. I believe that this amendment puts the legislature in the lead on deciding, designing what comes next with a clear mandate, a defined timeline, and a requirement to engage stakeholders who know the program best. Replacing ICS with a service that is clearly defined, properly structured, and built on a stable statutory foundation is what individuals we serve actually need. Thank you for listening, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Do we now have anyone else in the room? Seeing none, member discussions, Representative Barker.
Thank you, Chair. First question I have, I know this is down the road, but we're looking at the broader picture. How do you envision and what's your understanding how this would affect counties and providers?
Representative Corin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Backer. As far as, or I should say, as far as it goes, creating a new program or finding something in place of this, it's my understanding that the funding structure itself and who's paying for which shares is not affected by any of this work that would require changes outside of this bill.
Okay, good.
Representative Barker.
Thank you. And then are there plans, are you thinking about then, because we're working at making improvements, are we thinking then including reports and audits during that as some of the recommendations to deliver these services better to folks at home and in their apartments? Are we looking at, not just reports and audits, but are there going to be some teeth behind it, enforcement?
Representative Corin.
Yeah, I can address that briefly, and then I can also turn it over to our testifier for additional details if he'd like to share some. But some of the work that's been done prior to today in the background was Mr. Berg and DHS and a collection of people receiving services and providing services have been trying to work on a replacement plan. We were hoping to, at some point, come to committee with that replacement plan, but what we're finding out is that as folks continue to do this work and try to dig in and figure out how it can be appropriately audited along the way and what kind of reports that we might be able to do, not just at the end of a year, but during a year to confirm and back up the claims that are being billed, that this requires more time than the legislature offers in this moment. And so that's why we decided, we just actually need a group specifically assigned to do this work and not necessarily under the time constraints that the active legislative session has. And I can turn it over to Mr. Berg for additional.
Mr. Berg, any addition?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Backer. The thing that I would add is I think this gives the time to understand where the department thinks it needs additional authority or oversight capabilities. I would argue that under 245D, 256, to several locations within statute, they have the authority to properly oversee and audit and request data, request information, service documentation. They do it all the time in other 245D programs, including this one as well. So it will give the opportunity, is there an area that needs to be strengthened or just reiterated or codified differently so that then it is clear that the department is able to oversee whatever that new program is, that they may think that there's weaknesses in their ability to do so right now. So I think those are all great recommendations and things that could come out of a group like this if that's what their priorities were.
Representative Barker.
No more questions. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Vice Chair Keel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Curran, for the bill. So I guess the bill is establishing a legislative study group. And I just want to talk a little bit about why I think that is a good approach. I know that we chatted about it. Representative Bakeberg and I did this around attendance. So if anybody knows from the education lane, there's all these opportunities that we can come together and brainstorm about a solution. There's task forces, there's working groups, there's like all of these things. And sometimes when we create task forces, what happens is you get like 1 million people on a task force and they're just hunkering down on their part of the work. But also you end up naming specific people, and that means that only those people are able to come into the room and have conversations. And we don't always love that because we don't know where and who is impacted by certain situations. And so the reason why Representative Bakeberg and I really looked into what a legislative study group is because we believed it was the most bipartisan way to find a solution that put the legislators in charge of having those conversations. It opens it up to anybody in the public. Anybody who does this work is welcome to join. It's public. There's hearings about it, so you can go back and see. And you then come out of this with strong recommendations to take into the next year that bipartisan legislators have gotten behind. So you're part of the solution. And I think we've been able to see slow, but really good work together. And so I support this approach. I think it's a good way to talk about a complex situation collectively, not only us across the aisle, but then across the aisle in the other chamber too, because sometimes we know what we do in the House doesn't always match what the Senate wants to do. So I appreciate it. Thank you for thinking a little bit collectively. It's also a good financial move because it's not as expensive as some of the other opportunities we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Kill. I'm hearing that it's not going to cost us $300,000 to get a study going, so thank you. As long as we can get volunteers in, I will go to Vice Chair Gilman.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you so much for the presentation today. So I have a couple questions. I don't know if DHS is here or not. If they're here, they're not here. Okay. So I can get this probably information from them, but is the ICS service, is there like a budget item, or does it, I mean, is this going to help us because we'll be able to have this, not working group, but what is it called, the legislative working group? So we can, so I just want to know, like, budget-wise, is this to help us when we talk about, I was intrigued by the scattered services versus just, one residence or one space. So is this going to end up, like, are we going to see numbers as well around this? Because for us, just with our budget growing, and again, just wanting to protect and ensure there's not waste, fraud, and abuse happening with scattered services, and we've seen some of these things come out on the news where people were not actually receiving services, and that, sends alarm, and there's a lot of shock factor. And there's also truth to some of the things that we're seeing. And we're seeing some providers that have figured out ways to exploit the system. So I just want to know, like, are we, I just want to know some numbers, and then also just with these two different approaches, are we going to, a little bit more about that?
Representative Coran.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I can take a shot at that without
Yeah.
DHS in the room, and I'm sure Mr. Berg has some insight to offer as well. I will say that the numbers and data that you're talking about, those are still ongoing efforts, right? Like, DHS is still doing investigations into questionable claims, into allegations of fraud. All of that is still happening. As part of this legislative study group, I would imagine that we would be looking at those numbers. The group wouldn't be themselves collecting those numbers. That wouldn't be the goal of this particular group. But I would expect that we would look at some statistics and look at where the bulk of the problems lie so that we can focus our efforts to lock those down and stop those problems from happening. Because what we know as ICS exists today is that there are some providers in some environments where this is working really well and people are getting what they need. But there are environments where this is not working. There are people who aren't providing the service, like you mentioned. And that's why we have to take such a deep dive when we've got a program that's sort of described as this blanket program, and then on the ground, it's delivered or not very differently, depending on where it is. So I hope that answers a little bit of your question. I don't know if you had a little bit to add.
Mr. Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Gilman. I mean, I think this would be perfect information that this work group would request and seek to have data on the case mix information of individuals receiving ICS services, which the department already has, and just that information from that starts to tell a story of why we have two different models of the 24/7 staffing versus those that don't have staff on site 24/7 that are doing more of the IHS-like model. So being able to get that data that the department is currently collecting, they currently have through the Min Choices assessment and everything else, the claims and all that stuff will start to tell a story. So I think it's a perfect piece of information that I think many of us have been asking for and trying to get our hands on to help tell the story of why we are here where we are, that we just can't always get that information as easily or transparently as we kind of hope, so.
Vice Chair Gilman.
Thank you. So just one quick follow-up with that. So the folks that are in the gray are intentionally defrauding and stealing taxpayer dollars by saying that they're providing a service right now. Would this bill, make it so DHS could not pause or suspend if there's known things happening in this timeline, would that actually happen? Or could it, because when I read it, it sounds like they could not stop that piece.
Representative Corrin.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that question, Vice Chair Gilman, and it was, it was very intentional that we made sure the language allowed for those investigations to continue. So if there are some weaknesses in that language that needs to be tightened up, I'm very, very open to ensuring that those processes can continue, and that when there are credible allegations of fraud, where we're seeing very clear evidence that that services have been part of any kind of fraud, waste, or abuse, that can be addressed in the moment, and that we're not stopping those efforts. So happy to work on that with you in the background. I know we're going to be laying bills over to continue work on, but that is an integral piece of this bill that has to stay in place. Otherwise, this would not be, it would sort of be for naught, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Just wanted to verify, is that the 3.7 to 3.9?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative. I just want to take this as a quick opportunity to say the department already has the authority to do everything that you just said. Nothing will change until a replacement service comes into place. The department has the authority to request service documentation from any of us providers, and they do it on a regular basis. So just for example, they ask us, hey, Representative Gilman receives ICF services in your setting. Can you give us the last 3 months of the data related to, or service documentation, so that they can then match it up with the claims that have been submitted? So if there's a misunderstanding of what authority DHS already has, maybe that's a question for the department, because they already are able to audit us on a regular basis whenever they want to make sure that the claims we submit are matching the service documentation and everything that we have that is required under 245D already. So this bill doesn't change any of that, doesn't take away any authority, doesn't grant any additional authority. They already have the authority to do that. Now it's just whether or not they are. That's a separate question.
Vice Chair Gilman.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I appreciate.
Just a quick question. Do we still have the moratorium that was instituted for ICS?
Yes, Mr. Chair, as far as I understand, the moratorium is still in place. Now, there was supposed to be a moratorium exception process that was outlined and published as of January 1. That still has yet to come out from the department. I know they are working on something related to ICS specifically, and was told recently that it'll be in the next couple weeks, but we've been told it's going to be in the next couple weeks for the past couple months. So I'm not sure where that is at.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a simple question. Representative Curran, Representative Keeler mentioned that others could join, but this is limited to the 8 elected and appointed as the only voting members of the task force.
Representative Corrin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative Murphy. So that's correct. However, I would note that it would operate just like this type of committee operates. So the advantage to that is it's fully public. We would bring in folks like Mr. Berg and hopefully have a chance to meet more folks receiving the services to talk about what's working and what's not working, so that whoever lands on that team can hear that public input on the record, and the legislative intent behind all of that is all laid out, as Representative Keeler mentioned. What we see in a community-based task force where there are named groups, of course, some groups get left out. Not everybody's in the know all the time. Somebody might find out 2 weeks later that this group is happening and they have so much to offer and they have such good insight, but they didn't know about it until now, so they're not part of the conversation, right? This allows, as things are going on, that anybody with an opinion on how this should go or insight on how these programs are vulnerable is more than welcome, and we hope that they would come to offer that insight.
Representative Murphy.
Will the elected chair be the lead of that committee, like we have here? Will they have any ability to kind of direct how that meeting is going in terms of who testifies, that sort of thing? Or is that going to rotate between Republican and Democrat sides? How will that work in an 8-to-8?
Representative Corrin.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate that question, too. This is something I've been thinking about because we're in a unique tie, right? The way that I understand it now is that it would probably fall under the purview of that committee, and we would look at what our current power sharing agreement dictates. And I would hope that we would sort of do a spinoff of that and just really have this sort of nonpartisan group of legislators. If the group decided it was best to rotate chairs, sure, maybe we could do that. But I really don't see this as a standard sort of committee setting where you have a chair who's driving an agenda. There's really only one agenda and everybody's part of that team. So however that structure rolls out is really not that important to me. It's really about just getting folks in the room who are dedicated to the work and dedicated to listening truly to anybody who shows up. And to your point about not allowing testifiers, I would hope that any legislator part of that group would be against that practice.
Vice Chair Kill has got input on that.
Just to clarify, I feel like, so even when we weren't in a tie, when the Democrats were in charge and Beck Bakeberg and I did this, it was a co-chair working group. I mean, the whole point of this is design, but that's what the legislators at that table decide together. That's why when we went into it in a very bipartisan fashion, knowing that that's how you make good work stick. So all the questions you guys are asking are really great questions to have in that space. And collectively, what we were able to do is sort of decide what the topic of conversation wanted to be. And then we just did a call out. There's a whole staff that comes with this from a different agency that helps do public call outs. And it's part, like, organizations and entities share that with other networks. And so it's like this in the sense that public can have an input, but it's not like this in the sense that it's like, it shouldn't feel partisan. And so that's, again, back to just, I've not seen a lot of other people do this, but just from how we did this 2 years ago, we went into it very much thinking co-chairs.
Representative Murphy.
Chair, I appreciate that, and that's the way I'd like to see it go too. It's just in preparation for it. It's always good to make sure you don't look back on it, at the end of it and say, well, that could have been done a little better. So just in preparation, maybe the co-chair is just an idea that it keeps it the same way as it's been here. So thank you.
It's a good point so that we can even add it too. Mr. Beck, did you have any quick comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Representative Murphy, the one thing, and to Representative Keeler's points, I love this approach. So then this group is not led by the department, which, we're in the position we're in because a lot of these decisions have been led by the department. So it takes this and puts it in the legislature's control. And it's also not led by stakeholders and providers or whatever so that you get a biased approach to it. So this will hopefully bring, just a more objective, thoughtful, comprehensive approach, bring all the stakeholders together. And then when we come back, or when this group comes back with recommendations, there's not going to be those feelings of it was driven by one agenda-driving group. So,
To your closing remark, Representative Karan.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, members, for the discussion. I hope that the committee finds this to be a suitable alternative for the current governor proposal. We know that putting all ICS services into a 15-minute unit just isn't feasible, but we also know that there's a lot of problems with the structure of the program as it is today. So this is a genuine effort to bring us all together to fix a problem as we see it, rather than sort of wait and see what happens to it. And so of giving that control, not just to us as legislators, but giving it really to anyone in the community who has input so we can get this right.
With that, Representative Karan renews the motion, House File 1767, as amended to be laid over. So the bill is laid over.